Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Amy Mott has set us up. I think we're ready to launch right now. If Amy tells me that there's any technical problems, maybe we'll slow it down and set back up. But I'm going to proceed with the assumption that right now everybody can see our opening slide. This presentation is about the November 21st, 1970 raid on the Son Tay POW camp. It is the greatest thing that happened in the Vietnam War. That title is a quote of Jeremiah Denton, a POW, later an admiral, later a United States Senator. The raid on the POW camp at Son Tay is ranked as one of the most daring raids in world history. Admiral William McRaven, commander of U.S. Special Operations Command, uses it as one of his 10 case studies in his textbook that is used at professional military schools around the world. In a moment, I'll introduce our four panelists. Let me tell you right up front that this is a story in which we are going in to rescue POWs in the Hanoi area. And in this story, no POWs are rescued. And yet, it was a great success. The morale of the POWs soared. We knew that there was a significant risk that we would get no POWs. President Nixon's conversations with Admiral Moore and Secretary of Defense Melvin Laird in the days prior acknowledged that. But to a man, from the president to Admiral McCain, whose son, later Senator John McCain, was in prison at the time, and Admiral McCain knew that it was unlikely that his son would be rescued in this raid and might face repercussions, all the way down to the guys with the machine guns going in. Everyone knew we had to do it for the benefit of the POWs. Our panel will be going in chronological order in 4 phases, starting from the conceptual phase, going into the development and training phase, and then into the raid itself, into the POW camp. And the 4th phase is the aftermath as experienced by the POWs. And let me introduce our panelists in reverse order. At the bottom of your screen, you see that we are honored today to have a POW, Lee Ellis. He was tortured and tormented and moved from camp to camp. On July 14th, 1970, he and all the POWs were secretly removed from the squalor that was the Son Tay POW camp. Lee has frequently been interviewed on the national news networks such as Fox News and C-SPAN. He is the author of Leading with Honor, Leadership Lessons from the Hanoi Hilton. Moving up from the bottom, you see Pat St.Clair. He was a Green Beret on the helicopter that landed inside the compound within the walls of the POW Son Tay POW camp. Pat retired as a command sergeant major and has many times given speeches and interviews helping both military and civilian audiences understand the Son Tay raid. Terry Buckler was a Green Beret on one of the helicopters that landed just outside the walls of the Son Tay POW camp. He was the youngest Son Tay raider, a sergeant 20 years old. He has just published a book, Who Will Go Into the Son Tay POW Camp, which includes first-person accounts of 40 of the Army, Air Force, and Navy participants in the Son Tay raid. But our first presenter is author and historian Colonel John Gargus, who not only was one of the planners of the Son Tay raid, but was on the raid as a navigator on the aircraft Cherry II. His book is seen as the highest authority on the topic. The Son Tay raid, American POWs in Vietnam were not forgotten. There's the cover of his book, and Colonel Gargus, I'll let you take it from here.
Okay, please give me the next slide. In 1970, we did not know the exact number of POWs that were interred in several prison camps in North Vietnam. We did not really know the exact number of camps because some were active, some were inactive, and prisoners were being moved here and there. However, in May of 1970, next slide, please, the SR-70 photography in Buffalo Hunter photography was analyzed by Intel analysts at Fort Belvoir in Virginia, and they discovered that there was a prisoner of war camp just west of Son Tay City. The Buffalo Hunter photography revealed showed one individual, which was obviously American because his shadow showed that he was more than 6 feet tall. And next to him in the courtyard was a sign, PO, spelled out POW. This is how the laundry was displayed. So POWs were signaling us that here we are and perhaps come to get us. Next slide, please. This information from Fort Belvoir was brought to the attention of General Allen, who was Deputy Chief of Staff for Plans and Operations. He consulted with his chief planner, Colonel Frisbee, and together they determined, yes, this would be perhaps a good place for us to stage a raid and rescue some of the prisoners of war. So with that agreement, they approached General Blackburn, who at that time was Assistant Secretary for Counterinsurgency and Special Activities. And he was expert in special operations, having served in Studies and Observation Group in Saigon before. He was tasked to form a group, a study group that would test the feasibility of could we do this and what force would we need to affect this. This phase of the planning was called Polar Circle. Now, they concluded their study by June, and on June 10th or on July 10th, they briefed Joint Chiefs of Staff about a possible raid to rescue some 60 prisoners from Son Tay. The Joint Chiefs of Staff embraced the concept. They thought it was great and immediately decided that such operation would have to, for secrecy, would have to be conducted under their supervision. They would have to keep the command in Saigon, the people who were running the war, out of the picture. The training would have to be done in the United States without interference from the Army and Air Force major commands. So it would be done directly under their supervision. They also decided, since at that time, we didn't have a joint service organization that could work together to conduct such a raid as we have today. So the Joint Chiefs of Staff authorized creation of Joint Contingency Task Group of Army and Air Force people who would train together at Eglin Air Force Base in Florida. Why Eglin Air Force Base in Florida? Well, the commander of the operation to rescue the prisoners was destined to be General Leroy Manor, who at that time was the commander of Air Force Special Operations Forces, and they were headquartered at Eglin Air Force Base. His deputy was designated as Colonel Bull Simons. Bull Simons was a legend in Green Berets. So that was it. These were the two principal commanders. They also decided that the operation, the actual rescue of prisoners would be commanded from the Tactical Control Center at Monkey Mountain near Da Nang in Vietnam. That's where General Manner and his staff would be sitting during the raid. He would have radio contact with the ground forces. He would have a radio contact with the Air Force forces. And also he would be tied into the Navy network in the Gulf of Tonkin through their ship Red Crown. And he would be able to see the display of everything that Navy was doing in the Gulf of Tonkin. Navy would be tasked later on in the program to provide a diversion for the Air Force forces coming from the west into the Son Tay. And so that was the plan. Now, also, they determined at that time that there would be 15 aircraft that would be training and developing tactics in Florida, in the Florida Panhandle at Eglin Air Force Base. You will notice that the second item over there is UH-1 Huey. The initial concept was that we would use an Army helicopter with 11 Green Berets that would land inside of the compound at Son Tay, eliminate the guards and free the prisoners, and other helicopters would be landing outside. They would extract the prisoners and bring them back home. Well, after we worked out all of this, we incorporated the Huey into our formation flying. We found out that it was not feasible because the first dress rehearsal that we had with 11 people in a Huey cramped up on a 3.5-hour flight. Once they landed, they could not perform in a timely manner because they were all cramped up. So immediately, Colonel Bull Simons decided we can't use a Huey, we need a larger helicopter. The larger helicopter turned out to be HH-3. The problem with that one was that it required 14 more feet of space for its rotors to land through the trees. Well, we had to live with that. So we knew that helicopter landing inside of compound would be chopping down tree limbs, and our photo analyst said that we would have only 2 feet of space between tree trunks. So the occupants of the HH-3 upon landing would be like inside of the lawnmower. Please reverse the slides. You're going through it too fast. Okay, next we are going to cover the other aircraft that were selected and the reason why they were selected. The first one you see here is a Combat Talon. We had 2 of those, Cherry 1 and Cherry 2. The reason why they were selected to participate in a raid is that these aircraft flew in the theater, in the war theater, into North Vietnam at night, conducting clandestine missions. They had terrain following equipment, fantastic, up-to-date electromagnetic countermeasures that told them where the threats were. And also, these aircraft had Fulton recovery system. Fulton recovery system was a system which allowed pickup of live persons from the ground into the air. So we also had rescue capability in these airplanes. So these 2 airplanes were crewed up by people from Pope Air Force Base and Ramstein Air Base in Germany, were designated as formation escort ships for others. Now here we see the first formation. This is the formation of Jolly Green Giants flying over Eglin. As you can see, they're stacked up in the V formation. This would be the first mission that would be conducted at night with helicopters. Up to that time, helicopters flew only during the day. The Vietnam was at that time still a daytime war. So for this raid, everything from the ground had to be blacked out. Only the top lights of the aircraft would be seen, and that was a must because they needed a reference point to fly in formation, because there was complete radio silence and complete blackout. The Jolly Green Giants HH-53s were numbered Apple 1 through Apple 5, and HH-3, the one landing inside of the compound, had a code name or a call sign Banana. Next slide, please, shows the formation of A1E Sky Raiders and with Cherry 2. The Sky Raiders would provide interdiction. They would provide local protection for the ground forces flying low and attacking tanks or APCs or any trucks that would come to the rescue of Son Tay. Their call signs were Peach 1 through Peach 5. Next slide, please, shows two C-130 tankers, Combat Kings, who would be required to refuel the helicopters on the way in, and then again coming back. These helicopters, these ships were from Cameron Bay that were TDY to Udorn. Now, obviously, we needed other Air Force aircraft to help us. We did not know exact number that would be required. We knew that we needed some aircraft for MiG protection, MiG killers, and we also needed aircraft, wild weasels, to protect us against surface-to-air missiles. Our intent was to keep the MiGs on the ground. So we needed a signal for the North Vietnamese that we had MiG killers flying over Phu Quien Air Base where they had night alert MiGs. That would assure that they stayed on the ground and they would use only missile defenses, which would not be effective against our helicopters, against low flyers. Well, when we planned with these planners once in Southeast Asia, they gave us 10 F-4s, 2 waves of 5 to protect us against MiGs. And people from Korat gave us, Wild Weasels gave us 5 of them to protect us from SAMs. Now, these needed tankers. The number of tankers really surprised us because Strategic Air Command from Utapao offered 12 tankers. Can you imagine 12 KC-130 tankers? So we were questioning that number, and the Stonebarger, who was the mission planner for these tankers who were on orbit, lemon and orange, that did fit with the fruit salad call signs that we had. He said he needed 12 tankers because he wanted enough fuel over Laos in case we got in trouble. If somebody got stranded or things just fell apart, there would be many aircraft that would be taking off to help us. And he said, I want to be sure that I have enough fuel over Laos to satisfy all demands. Now, in addition to that, there were Combat Apple C-135s that were in orbit 24 hours a day, monitoring all radio transmissions from North Vietnam. Well, for the raid, we needed 2 of them. And one of them was Colonel Frisbee, whom I mentioned before. He was an alternate commander for the raid. If something went wrong at Monkey Mountain, Colonel Frisbee would be commanding the action from Combat Apple. And also, we needed 2 College I EC-121s. These were the ships that would control F-4s in intercepting MiGs if there was any MiG battle. Okay, now we're going to see very quickly the terrain over which we had to fly. It was very challenging for navigation because we were flying over jungle and there were no good checkpoints to be had. Yet we were flying from Thailand, from home bases of all the aircraft into what was known at that time as the most heavily defended area in the world. Here you see Son Tay and the red circle, that was Hanoi. We were 23, 25 miles from Hanoi. Next slides will show our close proximity to Son Tay. You see the compound there, and this is Son Tay Citadel in Son Tay City. So we were just west of the city. Advance the slides, please. Okay, there you see today's satellite photo. That's where the camp used to be. Now it's overgrown with vegetation. Next slide. This is an overlay of our plan, which will be covered later by somebody else. So please advance the slide again. And here is a buffalo hunter view of the camp. As you can see, it is isolated. There's a river to the west, bridge but north, down south. We have a canal, and the area that you're seeing there, that's equivalent of 3 football fields. So it was really a small area. So we figured that if we can get in there undetected and we have 30 minutes on the ground, we can rescue all 60 or so prisoners that were housed there. Next slide, please. And this is the last one. It shows all the Air Force tracks from Thailand into the objective area. In the objective area, if you see the circles represent the orbits for the F-4 MiG killers. Figure 8 represents the orbit for A-1E wild weasels. To the east, you see the Navy participation. Because the mission was advanced by 24 hours, General Manor did not get the plan for the Navy diversion until he was at Monkey Mountain. But the Navy staged an attack, 3-wave attack into the North Vietnamese airspace, which completely saturated their air defense capabilities. The radars were so busy scanning everything to the east that they did not ignore what was happening in the west. And this allowed us, the Air Force aircraft, to enter into the area undetected or unmolested. So everything worked out as planned. So we were very grateful and we're thankful to the Navy for doing that. That concludes my presentation.
Thank you, Colonel Gargus. And this photo, I love this photo. This is Colonel Gargus, Major Gargus, in Eglin Air Force, at Eglin Air Force Base. This is right outside the headquarters building of the Air Force Special Operations Force, and where so much of the planning happened. And this is a diorama made by the Defense Intelligence Agency of the Son Tay POW camp. This is now on display at the National Museum of the United States Air Force in Dayton, Ohio. And on the right, just to remind you, this is the authoritative book on the Son Tay raid by John Gargus. Next, we have Terry Buckler, who's going to take us through the portion of development and training, which was done at Eglin Air Force Base right up to the night of the raid and the trip across the Pacific. Terry.
Thank you. Well, it all started at Fort Bragg, as far as the Green Berets were included in it. Bull Simons, the call went out on Smoke Bomb Hill that he was looking for volunteers down at what we called the Little White House. We went down there, and when I got down there was about 500 other Special Forces guys waiting to see what Colonel Simons had to say. And Bull Simons was an icon in Special Forces. He was our John Wayne, if you will. And because he was running the mission, everybody wanted to be a part of it because they all knew that Bull Simons was a man that got you in and got you out safely. So there was over 500 of us at the meeting that day. Bull told us that there didn't really give a lot of information about what we were going to be doing, other than it was a moderately hazardous mission, and there'd be no TDY, and we should be back by Christmas. So with that knowledge, he said, if you want to participate, be back here at 1300 hours and we'll start an interview process. And the interview process was done by 2 sergeant majors. And once we were selected, we filled out our wills and our powers of attorney. And that should have been a little tip off too, that this was more than just a training mission as well. So with that in mind, we were going to Eglin. And at that time, we had there was about 109 of us selected. And out of that, only 56 actually went on the ground at Son Tay. And it kept us isolated. Everyone knew, that the security was very, very important to us, even though we didn't know where we were going or what we were going to do. The training was rigorous, and Eglin was selected because there was a lot of flying going on down there by different aircraft anyway. So not to raise any suspicions of what we were doing, we trained at Auxiliary Field number 3, and that was very close to where Doolittle Raiders trained a few years earlier. And security was extremely tight, and we respected that, knowing that there was more to this mission than met the eye at the time. So we knew we had to keep our training to the quality that Bull wanted, and he was very demanding in that respect, but it was for our own benefit. In this, there were several firsts. We mentioned the C-130s that we followed in. They were flying at 5 knots above stall speed, no lights, no radio, refueling the choppers in the air. That was an interesting sight to view at night. And we also added the single point night scopes, which we use for quick kill inside the compound. We did rehearsals. We rehearsed over 170 rehearsals at that time. We started in the daytime. We did a walkthrough, and then as we progressed, we did a run, started doing it at normal speed. We would be doing it at the raid. And then we added live ammo for our training. And along with that, we were practicing getting off the chopper, getting back on the chopper without any incidents. The live fire was a real interesting part for us. And there were 3 elements to the raid. There was red wine, green leaf, and blue boy. And within each element, everybody had their own specific duties to perform. And it was kind of interesting. We really didn't know what the guys on Greenleaf were doing, because we were concentrating on what we did on red wine. But we also, the planners of this mission were fantastic. They just thought of everything. And we did rehearsals. The planners had told us that if we lose 1 chopper, we'll continue the mission. If we lose 2 choppers, we'll have to abort, because we just won't have the manpower against the odds that they anticipated. So we did a lot of rehearsing. Most of our rehearsing after we got there, after about probably 2 or 3 weeks of rehearsing, we went to night training, and we'd run through it 3 times a night, getting on the bird, dismounting, going through our process that each one of us would do, and then getting back on the bird and flying back. So what you're looking at here is the mock-up. We had a mock-up of the compound. I say it looks like 2x4s with toilet paper wrapped around it, but that's target cloth that they used. And there was always some question whether was the mock-up taken down every night? And the answer to that was no, it was not. They did a test to see if they could determine anything from the flyover, taking pictures to see if it'd give away what we were doing. And because of what they had done with the target cloth, it really proved that we could leave it up, and it was left up the entire time when we were doing training. So moving on, when we left Duke Field, they came in one day and said, pack your bags, we're going to be leaving. And we had no idea where we were headed to, but we knew we were getting close to our mission. We knew it was a rescue mission, but we really didn't know where it would be and who would be rescuing. But just based on our training, we knew it was a type of a rescue. At that time, there were several aircraft that had been hijacked, and we thought maybe we'd be doing that. And then after we did some of the training, we had a 3.5-hour flight. The rumor was, well, maybe we're going to Cuba to do something there. But needless to say, we jumped on a 141. We flew from over to Tak Lee Air Force Base in Thailand, which was a CIA compound. And that's where we ended up for the next few days till we were told that what the actual mission was going to be. As Colonel Gargus was talking about the attacks that were made by the Navy and the Air Force, they were from 3 different aircraft carriers, and I'll tell you, their mission was a real key to the success of this. There was over 116 aircraft that night that were flying and over Hanoi, dropping flares. And while they were doing that, we were sneaking in the backside to the Son Tay POW camp. While we were at Tak Lee, we got there on the 18th, and we were just waiting for the mission to be approved. Some of us in the lower ranks didn't actually know that, but the commanders knew what was going on, and we were waiting for the word from the top down. And the final approval of this did come from President Nixon. And this happens to be a letter that he had written to Melvin Lair, stating that he gave us full support, and anything that transpired from that, he would take full responsibility. And my hat's off to him for taking that type of an approach to getting our men back, which was the whole mission. And as you can see, he was truly supporting us. The next thing we did, shoot to the next slide, if you will. This is just showing where we were stationed at Son Tay and where the POWs were and what we were doing there. At 1800 hours on the 20th, Bull Simons wanted us into a little auditorium, and he walked in along with Colonel Sidnor, had a big map up of North Vietnam and a big circle around Hanoi and another big circle around Son Tay. And that's when we were told what we were going to do that night. And it was just can't tell you how it felt to know what our mission was going to be. When Bull told us what the objective was and where we were going, it was dead silence in the auditorium for about 5-6 seconds. And then it was like a cannon went off, and everybody jumped up and was whistling and saying, let's go get them. And Bull calmed us down a little bit by some of his comments. And next slide. Cliff, you want to go through that next slide on what the Bull's comments were?
I sure will. Thank you, Terry. Allow me to read this through, because this reveals not only that mission, but really the heart of America and the heart of the U.S. military. Colonel Simons at that 6 p.m. speech revealing to the Green Berets and the Raiders where they were going, he said, We are going to rescue 70 American prisoners of war, maybe more, from a camp called Son Tay. The target is 23 miles west of Hanoi. This is something our American prisoners of war have a right to expect from their fellow warriors. We are all part of the same military family. We want these men to know they are not abandoned by their military family. No man should feel that way. That's why we're going in there after them. You are to let nothing interfere with the operation. Our mission is to rescue prisoners, not to take prisoners. If there's been a leak, well, we'll know it by the time the second or third chopper sets down. If we're walking into a trap, if it turns out they know we're coming, don't even dream about walking out of North Vietnam unless you got wings on your feet. We'll be 100 miles from Laos. It's the wrong part of the world for some sort of retrograde maneuver. If it happens, I want to keep this force together. We'll back up to the Song Khan River if we have to, and by God, they're welcome to come across that damned open ground. We'll make them pay for every foot across that son of a bitch. And that really tells you a lot about Colonel Bull Simons, who is a legend in Special Forces. Now, Pat St.Clair was on the helicopter that landed inside the POW camp.
Thank you, Cliff. I keep getting an unstable communications on my computer, so hopefully I won't cut out.
Okay, you sound good.
I was one of 14 members of the assault force, codenamed Blue Boy. In the picture, I'm standing far right. Next to me are two men, Captain Yeager and Lorenzo Robbins. We are the only 3 living members of the assault force still alive. I was the last person selected for the raid. About a week and a half out, one of the assault members sprained his ankle so badly that he couldn't continue, so I was selected to fill his spot. Like Terry, this was my first combat experience, so you could imagine the pucker factor that I had going into the compound. Captain Meadows is squatting closest to the camera with the bullhorn. He is the commander of the Blue Boy assault element. My job coming into the compound was to lie on the ramp on the port side and fire left-handed at the towers just in case the gunships hadn't taken them away. And once inside the compound, we were to eliminate all the guards as quickly as possible, then free the POWs and then take them out to the awaiting aircraft. The timeline, 0219 was when we crashed inside the compound. If you look at the next line, it's 0229. It took us 10 minutes to do a thorough search and realize that there were no POWs there. The code name for that was negative items. If you also look further down, you see some SAM activity. That is surface to air missiles. They did fire surface to air missiles that are supporting aircraft and even fired a couple at us on the helicopters leaving. One thing about the surface to air missiles, they are heat seeking generally. That means they try to find the exhaust of the aircraft and fly up into the engine itself. However, they can also be operated remotely by the operator. The ones that we had flew by us, and then probably the operator lost us on his radar screen and it detonated, hoping the explosion would cause some shrapnel to hit our aircraft. Luckily, no aircraft hit as far as the helicopters. We did have a couple of the F-105s hit, which we will discuss a little bit later. Next slide, please. Okay, this is a picture. Can you still hear me?
Yes, you're loud and clear.
Okay. This is a picture taken on one of the rehearsals in the Banana aircraft. I'm seated to the far right. Next to me is Captain Meadows, my element commander. On the far left seated is Captain Meadows, and next to him is Pappy Kittleson. This was Pappy Kittleson's 4th POW camp raid. He was a member of the elite Alamo Scouts that directed the raid on Canabaton in the Philippines, probably the most noted POW raid in American history. One of the items, if you see the white-looking box with the tape or bands on it, that is actually a medical chest that Doc Cataldo put together. It has some IVs and other injectables that he thought maybe the POWs would be in need of on the flight out. The fire extinguisher-looking canisters are actually acetylene gas canisters for settling ports, which one of our members was a settling welder and all that. So we took that along with us in case the sails or whatever needed the torches to cut in. Those two items actually did not fly in on the Banana aircraft with the actual raid. They were put on another aircraft. Next slide, please. This was probably taken by one of the Buffalo Hunter drones. It shows a couple of key points. Number one is the canal bridge, and number two is the bridge across the Song Kong River. Those were strategic locations in case they had to be taken out, in case a quick reactionary force was to respond to the activity in the camp. The A-1E Sky Raiders did take out one of the bridges. I can't remember if they took out both of them, but that eliminated any possibility of enemy troops coming through the main highways of ingress to the compound. Next slide, please. Now, this is a diagram of the compound and the flight path of Apple III, which was the gunship. It had the 20mm cannons that flew over the compound and eliminated pretty much both towers on the northwest and southwest corners of the compound. Then it flew through the areas on the outside to take care of any troops that might be out there. In particular, it hit the commo shack. That was very important that we take care of that so that the commo could not be sent out that, hey, you know, we got some activity over here, send quick reactionary force as soon as you can. Next slide, please. This is a painting by noted Russian artist, Nikiforenko. I don't know if you can see it or not, but I have one behind me. This depicts the HH-3 that crashed inside the compound. If you would take a look at the soldiers on the far right running towards building A, I would be a part of that group. My job was to, along with Lorenzo Robbins, was sprint to the guard tower, make sure it's been eliminated, and then neutralize the area between buildings A and B and the walls. This was the first in a series of paintings commissioned by the Special Forces Museum. I forget what number they're up to, but all the major operations of Special Forces up to including Iraq and Afghanistan have been included in that collection. Next slide, please. This is another painting that doesn't depict any specific description inside the compound. It's just to, I think, show that we had choppers on the ground, choppers in the air, aircraft, just a contingency of what we had at Son Tay. This would obviously be somewhere outside the compound. Next slide, please. These are two heroes of mine. This was taken on the night of infill. To the left is Billy K. Moore. He was also my team sergeant back at Fort Bragg. And looking at his equipment he's carrying, on his right chest is the radio. I don't know the particular model. We all carried PRC 90s, which is your SAR mission radio. You can get in contact with the aircraft with that. Now, the white canisters with the cord sticking out are actually explosive charges that were placed in Banana 1 to blow it up. They were put, I can't remember if they put in the fuel tanks or next to them. And the white cord sticking out is the time fuse. You light it, then it burns a specific rate, then burns into the cap and sets off the explosion. He's carrying a Car 15, or the Air Force version of a shortened M16. They decided that that would be better for us for the close quarters combat. On it is a single point scope. That's a remarkable scope. Once we picked that up, our nighttime marksmanship improved dramatically. It's as a luminescent green dot at night and a regular red dot in the daytime. It is occluded, so you cannot look through it. You have to use both eyes to use the scope. You focus on the target, bring the dot up to the target, press the trigger to the rear, gun goes off, and the target goes down. On the right is Captain Meadows with his bullhorn. That bullhorn is the essential piece of equipment so he could communicate with POWs. When we landed, he said something to the effect, "We are Americans, we've come to rescue you. We will be in your cells shortly. Stay down, we will rescue you. You're going home." And on his right leg calf is the Camelus survival knife. All the Raiders was issued that. It's pretty much a Marine Corps staple that the planners did secure one of those for each person. Next slide. Let's go to the next slide. It actually gives a close-up of that. This is a diagram of what we did inside the compound and what the other elements did outside. We crash landed into the compound. Then my element went between 5A and the wall. We made sure that the tower had been destroyed. Then Robbie and I searched the building closest to the tower. There was nothing in it. It was like a storage building. And it does show the actions of Sendor and Simons when they landed on the outside. Next slide, please. Like the Poseidon adventure, there's always a morning after. This is what is left of the now one, the HH-3. This was released by the North Vietnam. They actually tried to use propaganda saying that the United States had participated in ground actions in the North, which was prohibited by our agreement with them. Now, if you take a look at the trees that's been chopped off, that's how hard the helicopter hit. We actually came in on the wrong compound in the beginning. We went to the secondary school, which was south of the POW camp. Our pilots realized the mistakes, executed a quick S-turn, and then came right in on the real compound. I have nothing but accolades for the pilots that brought that ship in. We came in a lot faster than what we normally would because the clock was ticking. No doubt they knew that we were there just because of the aircraft activity. What that did is cause Nixon to go public. I admire President Nixon for having the courage to, first of all, authorize the race. He understood the torture and just the unbearable living conditions the POWs were living in. So he called an immediate news conference. He flew General Manager Colonel Simons, Sergeant Wright, and Sergeant Natalie for a White House public briefing, and pretty much told the world what we did. And of course, from there on, it kind of took the air out of the North Vietnamese propaganda. Next slide, please. This is to illustrate what happens when one of the aircraft gets shot down. I think we had two F-105 Wild Weasels hit, but one of them did have to, the pilots did have to punch out due to the fuel tank leakage. They were leaking fuel faster than they could burn it. They punched out over the plane of jars. Then the Apple 3 and 4 did the search and rescue and picked them up bright and early the next morning. Now, if you look at the formation, as Colonel Gargus stated, that's a daytime formation. You could imagine what it was like at night. The pilot had to keep, the C-130 had to keep all 4 engines in tune manually. There was no automatic pilot to use on that. So they had superb flying skills. Then, of course, the HH-3 pilot is literally flying off the wing of that. So you could imagine how they had to concentrate for 3 hours on that flight from Hue Dorn into Son Tay. Next slide, please. To sum up, coming out, we had a feeling of dejection. We actually thought we had failed. We just couldn't figure out what went wrong. You know, we practiced good, executed good, but unfortunately the POWs they were not there. However, in the spring of 1973, Ross Perot sponsored a welcome home to the POWs in San Francisco, and they asked him to invite the Raiders too. And at that time, we got to talk to the Raiders. They told us, no, it wasn't a failure. We benefited greatly from that. And what was really amazing, the POWs never lost their spirituality. They never lost faith in America. And you can imagine the torture and the isolation they had to endure. From that, I learned that I can never have a bad day. If I think I'm having it rough or things just aren't going that well, I just think of what one POW had to put up with his stay in captivity to the barbaric North Vietnamese. Thank you.
And with that, let's hear from one of those POWs, Colonel Lee Ellis. And sir, you're still muted.
It's great to be with you all today. I'm in the presence of heroes, and I know all these guys. I've known them for a good many years, and it's just great to be here with you today and tell this story from the inside and what was happening there. I was captured in 1967. I spent 8 months in Hanoi Hilton, and then was in the group that was moved out to Son Tay. We moved out there in the summer of 1968. And we stayed there until the summer of 1970. So we were there about 2 years. It was about 25 miles or so northwest of Hanoi. So we were away from all the leaders there in Hanoi, but we still had torture going on. In fact, the summer of 1969, because back home there was a lot of pressure being put on the communists about our treatment, demanding that we be treated in accordance with the Geneva Accord for treatment of POWs. And so they actually tortured some of the guys in our camp. They were about a third of the way through, torturing them to sign a statement that summer of '69 saying that they had received good treatment. Now put that one on and think about that. Because to them, the communists told us is truth is that which most benefits the party. The end justifies the means. That's kind of a dangerous philosophy, isn't it? Well, we were there and we were living through it, and it was day by day. We had been there long enough to live day by day, not knowing what was coming, but believing that we could get through it. It was terrible in some ways, and some days we were having fun. You know, you have to learn humor. It took me 3 months to laugh. Next slide. I've already talked about the first two there. I just want to move a little bit to the second one, though. Yes, we were having water problems, but I really believe in retrospect, and that's what we thought when we first learned about this. But once we came home and were around for a while, and I've been studying this, I've written a couple of books about it. So I've done a lot of research on what actually was happening back home. And so then you put all the pieces together, you can see that move out of Son Tay really was not just for us. There were 3 other groups that moved. So we had over 200 prisoners. We had 4 compounds of 50 or so each. So we had 200 prisoners in this new camp that we called the Showplace camp that we had moved to. They did regular move us. So I lived in 5 or 6 different camps while I was there. And some people lived in 7, 8, or 9, or 10 over the years while we're there. Next slide. You know, this is no doubt it's a great raid, and we didn't know about it right away. We knew something happened. And that night we heard the raid, we heard the SAMs going off, we heard some bombs dropping. We just heard all that going off, and the lights, electric lights in the camp there went off. Now, when we moved only about 5 or 6 miles away. So we could hear all that going on around us, and we didn't know what it was. But we knew there hadn't been any bombing there in quite a while. Nothing like this in several years, a couple of years even. So something was up. Well, the next day we saw the look in the guards' eyes. You could always tell by their demeanor what was going on. And we knew something had happened. And within 48 hours, they rolled trucks in there, loaded us in the back, of course, handcuffed and leg irons, and rolled us into Hanoi and back to the Hanoi Hilton. But this time we went to a different section of the Hanoi Hilton. We went where there had been hundreds of Vietnamese prisoners. And now we went into cells that were large enough for anywhere from 40 to 60 men to live in there in an open bay barracks area. So I was in room 3 there in the Hanoi Hilton in this part of it. And it was about 1,800 square feet, open room. And there were 53 of us in there for the next 2 years. So the interesting thing that happened was eventually we did find out there was a raid, and then we knew it was Son Tay, and we were celebrating because we were together. For the first time ever, we had 335 POWs in one camp. Now, some stayed in the zoo camp and another camp for a couple of months, but by spring of 1971, we were 335 of us in one camp. We had all our leaders there. We formed Camp Unity, that's what it was called, and the 4th Allied POW Wing. We had some Vietnamese and Laotian prisoners there that were allowed to roam around. In fact, they were our intelligence sources. They could understand the language. They picked up what was going to happen, and they would come back into the camp and somehow through covert communication share that with us. So it was an incredible thing that happened. And so most of us got in rooms with other people. In that cell I was in, we got organized. We had all sorts of learning classes and training for people. I mean, you could I studied Spanish, French, and German there for 2 years. So it was amazing what we were able to do once we got back to Hanoi after the Son Tay raid. It also let us know that they were willing to come after us, and that was very important. Well, Pat mentioned the San Francisco event, and Ross Perot did so much for all of us and for our families while we were gone. And he threw that party in San Francisco. Can you imagine guys in uniform, veterans from the war, in a parade in San Francisco? It's hard to imagine today, but that's what happened back then. And we were very much honored. We got to meet John Wayne and all the many stars there. And it was just a very special weekend that we spent. And we got to know each other, the Raiders and the people who had lived at Son Tay, plus some of our other POW leaders that were there, all because Ross Perot made it happen. He flew us all in from everywhere. It was really special. Next slide. Back at Son Tay there, where we were, you can see the river on the left. This is looking from south to north, basically. And we knew that we were somewhat isolated, but yet we didn't know exactly where the village was, because we always were moved blindfolded at night. Next slide. And you see that layout there, the Son Tay camp right there, right next to the river. In fact, sometimes with heavy rains, there was a fear that that place might flood. Next slide. Here's another better view of it. This actually, I think, almost looks like the model they built down to work with down at Eglin when they were training. But you can see the bottom right, that's the cat house. We always name places. The cat house. I lived in the cat house, and over there on the right of the other two buildings that are hooked together there, the right one there's the opium den, and the left one is the beer hall. So we had names for all of these. We were able to communicate using our tap code, but flashing it from one building to the other. And I was usually one of the lead communicators, and always the lead communicator in my cell and one in our building. And I would receiving flash signals. The guy, they would open up the shutters over there, and my buddy Ron Masson would tap code on like this, and I would receive it and pass it to the other guys in the cell. Next slide. This is many years later when some of my friends went back, I think it was 1998, and they took pictures. They had a guide and actually went back to Son Tay, and of course it's kind of degraded there now, but you can see that's the cat house on the top right photo there, and then the concrete foundation there was our wash house, and we would go out there most days for about 10 minutes and pour water. There was a big canister concrete vat of water. We'd pour water over our bodies and take a shower. On the left side, you can actually see that tub a little bit better. That was our bathtub. It was probably 4 by 8 feet, and it was filled with water, and we just had a bucket there with a handle in it. We'd pick it up and pour it over our naked bodies and wash off. And then, you know, when it's 60 degrees or 55 degrees in the winter and you're pouring water over your body, it gets a little cold. We never had a hot shower in all those years. In the bottom right, you can see that's also the cat house. I lived there the whole time I was in Son Tay for the 2 years I was there in that one. Anywhere from 3 to 5 guys in my cell. The most that was in any cell there was 6 guys down at the right-hand end of that building. Next slide. This is where the airplane, the helicopter crashed in, Banana One, and Pat and his guys came rolling in there. Well, it's aimed right at corner room. There was a quiz room, interrogation room, and sometimes a torture room, and the cell right next to it was my cell for most of the time I was there. So we were able to communicate by tapping through the walls, and eventually we learned to talk through the walls using a blanket as a muffler. And the bottom right and the two bottom pictures there, that's the tank. It's right over just to the left of the other picture there where the arrow is. It was over there, and one of my cellmates was put in there after being tortured because they thought he was trying to escape. He wasn't, but they thought he was, and there'd been an escape in another camp. This we call the tank, and you'll notice the roof is arched, and that runs left, east to west. So all day long, the heat was beating down on that place. It probably was 110 degrees all day long in there. And this guy, Jim Warner, was in there for about 5 months in solitary confinement. A lot of the time in leg irons, most of the time in leg irons. And it was quite an experience for him. The amazing thing was he had an IQ of over 160. Most brilliant person I've ever been around. And when he came back, I said, well, Jim, what did you do in there to pass the time? He said, well, I did a lot of things, but one of the things I did is I wrote a 1,000-line poem in iambic pentameter, epic poem about a young couple in a communist country. So we always learn to use our time well. Next slide. You know, we talked about this a little bit earlier, but this was one of the most daring commando raids in history. You see there, number 5, 1970, the Son Tay raid. And it is, and it's studied and thought about because it was so successful, even though it didn't bring us home in that way. Well, it was so successful. And I would just want to comment that, you know, the leadership that put this thing together was incredible. I know General Maynard. He was the commander. I met Colonel Simons, of course, he's legendary. And then Colonel Elliot Bud Sidner, also he and I became friends over the years, and what an incredible guy he was in his leadership. So having those guys, and you mentioned Captain Dick Meadows, of highly experienced guys, and several others in this area. And then you think about their commitment. All of these guys were so committed to what they were doing. And then the training was exceptional. And they did it day after day after day because they wanted to make sure they could execute. And they did execute with perfection. It was great teamwork. Now, I'm a leadership coach for more than 20 years. And when you talk about leadership, commitment by the people, training, execution, it all brings about teamwork and success. And that's exactly what they did. Next slide. I've been to Fort Bragg for some of the Son Tay reunions, and that on the left is a big monument to Colonel Bull Simons, and on the right, Captain Dick Meadows. Both they were really legendary in special operations and special forces through several wars. So these guys kind of stand there to remind us that what dedication, commitment, and training and leadership can really do. And I'm so glad it's there for all those in training and special forces to see. Next slide. One of my cellmates who was there almost 8 years, and the guy who brought in the TAP code that we use, Captain Smitty Harris. By the way, his book came out in 2019 on Veterans Day called TAP Code. And Smitty said, history recounts the story of the Son Tay raid as a mission of courage and compassion in which men were willing to lay down their lives for their brothers in captivity. So true. They were there to do their job and do their mission and do it with great commitment. Next slide. What they were coming after was some of this list here. This is the 335 or so, maybe the 350 counting other camps, but 335 of us that were ultimately in the Hanoi Hilton after the raid. You see that long list of POWs there. These were real people. Some of them there eventually were there 8 years as POWs. Next slide. On and on. Here we go. I was in room 3 right there. You can see my name. This is room 3 in the Hanoi Hilton after the raid. But so many of these guys, we've gotten to know each other over the years. We memorized name lists while we were there through our covert communication, but we've gotten to know each other through our reunions and work and all that sort of thing after we came home. Next slide. And here's another list of them. Well, the conclusion was, as Commander Denton, later Admiral Denton, said, the Son Tay raid was the greatest thing that happened in the war. Well, it was certainly the greatest thing for us because it changed our lives. It put us together where we could have these big rooms and have this great communication for the whole unit. And we also had these education programs and people to share with, people to counsel you when you had problems. It's amazing what we learned there. We learned to get along with people. Can you imagine being locked up 24/7 with 52 aggressive, egotistical, all air crews in that cell for 2 years, 24 hours a day? I'll tell you, we learned a lot about how to get along with people. It really helped us have good marriages when we came home. Next slide. So I tell a lot of those stories. This is a leadership book. It's really, every chapter's got stories from the POW camp. So we have a website, leadingwithhonor.com. So check it out there. And it's great to be with you all today. And I know we're ready to move forward.
Thank you so much, Colonel Ellis. We want to take a moment to give you a little bit more of the aftermath. Just to show my connection, I was 4 years old at the time of the Son Tay raid. My father was involved as a pilot aircraft commander of one of the tanker aircraft, Lime 2, on the Son Tay raid. And Terry and I are very, very happy with the chance to publish the book and tell so many of the stories of the raiders and the participants. The raid was something that had political fallout, and we can answer questions on that if those might come up. And therefore, it would have been easy for President Nixon to sweep it under the rug. In all the political sniping of Washington, D.C., there are a lot of Monday morning quarterbacks, armchair generals. But with integrity, Richard Nixon committed to his military ahead of time, and he followed through after the raid. Just 4 days after the raid, he hosted raiders in a televised conference in the East Room. Here, this is a photo that has, of course, President Nixon, Secretary of Defense Melvin Laird, Dr. Henry Kissinger. Here's the commander, Brigadier General Leroy Manor. Here's the Special Forces Commander, Colonel Bull Simons. Here's the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, Thomas Moorer, and then Lieutenant General Voigt of the JCS staff. You can see the video. It's easy to find on the internet of President Nixon hosting these raiders in the East Room. What he said then was, what these men have done is a message to the prisoners of war still in Vietnam, to the wives and their loved ones, some of whom are here in this room, that the prisoners of war have not been forgotten. And we will continue to do everything we can at the diplomatic table and in other ways to attempt to bring them back home. The Congress also, the Senate and the House, passed resolutions where America thanks the Son Tay raiders. And so let me read a little bit of these excerpts from it. Whereas increasing numbers of American military personnel remain in captivity in North Vietnam in circumstances which violate the Geneva Convention of 1949 on prisoners of war and offend standards of human decency, some having remained so as long as 6 years. And whereas the government of North Vietnam and the National Liberation Front have refused to identify the prisoners they hold, to allow impartial inspection of camps, to permit free exchange of mail between prisoners and their families, and to release seriously sick and injured prisoners as required by the Geneva Convention, despite repeated entreaties from world leaders. Now, therefore, be it resolved that the official command, officers, and men involved in the military expedition of November 21st, 1970, seeking the release from captivity of United States prisoners of war believed being held by the enemy near Hanoi, North Vietnam, be commended for the courage they displayed in this hazardous and humanitarian undertaking, which has lifted the hopes and spirits of our brave men imprisoned and fighting, as well as Americans everywhere. At this time, we're open to questions, and we have a question that we can start with here. Is it possible that the North Vietnamese had been warned about the raid ahead of the event? Would any of our panel like to answer that question? Colonel Gargus, I see you're speaking. Here we go.
Yes, I can answer that question. There's a memoir that was published just a few years ago by the deputy commander of the North Vietnamese forces, Phung Ta Thai. He was the Air Force general. And in his memoirs, he laments that everything that happened on that night was a complete surprise to them. he was surprised that it happened, even though he did suspect that Americans may pull off a raid, very specifically stating that he was concerned about the Son Tay prisoners of war. And he said that during 3 nights in July of 1970, he personally supervised the movement of not only the POWs, but all of the guards and evacuation of Son Tay. So this is the topmost source that I was able to find, who claims that he was completely surprised. And he said he was on vacation that night. He was down in southern North Vietnam, and General Giap, his boss, called him to come to Hanoi immediately. And he said he was so embarrassed because he said, we didn't know. We had no warning. So I believe that.
Yeah, from the inside, there was no indication that they knew anything was coming.
That's helpful. Thank you. Stephen Sherman asks, in Ben Shimmer's book, The Raid, he mentioned some follow-up planning for other efforts to be considered. My research, and this is Stephen Sherman, my research suggests that Melvin Laird cut off such planning because he didn't want Nixon to be aware of the possible plans. Do you have any information on that? On any other raids after the Son Tay raid?
No.
It's not something that I've come across. I would love to hear about it. I'd love to research what was considered.
Never heard anything about it.
We've had other presenters talk about MACV, the Military Assistance Command Vietnam, and a question of, was the MACV SOG, which is the MACV Studies and Observations Group, considered to perform the Son Tay raid? It seems like they were ones that were regularly doing clandestine behind enemy lines raids. Were they considered for doing this instead of the team that actually did it?
I can answer that. This was very specifically forbidden by the Joint Chiefs of Staff to communicate with anybody in the war zone. While I was based in North at Nha Trang during 77 and 78, the 97, 97, no, 77, 70, no, 67, 68 time frame. At that time, we suspected that there was a mole inside of SOG. General Singlob, who wrote his memories about his experiences at as head of SOG in Saigon, also comments about the mole that was discovered later on that was passing information from the President Thieu. Everything that went through President Thieu's office became known to North Vietnamese. So this was the mole. So for that reason, there was suspicion in Washington that something was wrong, amiss in that command. So they, even though General Blackburn did and the Bull Simons visit SOG during their visit to Vietnam before the raid, there was absolutely no mention made about the raid. They were kept in the dark.
On a follow-on, my follow-on on that one is there, what can you tell us about General Abrams' response to it when he was briefed? Especially, it was kind of late in the game. Was he jealous, wanting to take control himself? What was his response?
Well, again, the first response that was given to him by General Manner was that no, we do not need any assistance from you. We are working for the Joint Chiefs of Staff. And that was a big surprise to him. Because here you had a force that was imported into the war zone that he was running, and he was not aware of it, and he was informed that he should keep hands off. He turned to Simons, what do you need? How can I help you? Bull Simons told him, we have everything to the last bullet. We're bringing everything with us. And then he turned to Air Force. How about the Air Force? General Manner said, yes, we do need some Air Force assets to support us. So that was passed over to General Lucius Clay, who was the commander of the 7th Air Force at that time. And Abrams said, Lou, you handle it, give them everything they want.
Since we've talked a little bit about the Navy, can you also say how was Bardshar's response? And I'm thinking of, it sounds like there was not an infighting or jealousy, or, it was instead just so unified. It's at least that's the way it's coming across.
Not at all. Admiral Barchard was very cooperative, very enthusiastic, and he promised. Well, this is what they asked him. Can you send some aircraft into the air so Vietnamese have some targets in the east while we're coming from the west? Barchard says, I'm going to give you a very creditable attack on North Vietnamese airspace from the east that will completely saturate their air defense system. And this is exactly what he did, because the Navy, I did not mention it in my comment, Navy launched 59 aircraft. Air Force launched only 57. We did not expect that. We expected just few aircraft from the Navy, and the Navy launched a full operation. It was the largest nighttime naval operation of the war. 3 carriers were involved.
One last group to see if there was territorialism. Were the Navy SEALs considered to execute this mission?
Again, I can answer that. Navy SEALs were the first ones considered by the petty officer, Grabowski. This happened during the feasibility study. And it would have been a little bit more complicated to work with the Navy than with the Army. So that was put on a back burner. And after the Joint Chiefs of Staff were briefed, Navy was mentioned only as a possibility to provide a diversion. So Navy fell out of the picture during the feasibility study, and not Navy, very specifically Navy SEALs.
Okay, here's a question that came in, and I'll just take one of these at a time here. So the question is, I'm curious if the American POWs came across South Vietnamese POWs in captivity. I'd assume not at all, since North Vietnam most likely kept them as far apart from the Americans as possible. But even without having come across them, I wonder if Lee Ellis and other POWs heard anything about the South Vietnamese prisoners.
Generally, there were some captured with the Army guys in the South that were in the same camps in South Vietnam and for a while, a short while. but generally they were kept and treated separately from American prisoners. But in North Vietnam, there was only one that I'm aware of, one Vietnamese, and that was Dot, our man Dot. We called him Max. And he was an A-1 pilot, shot down and captured by the North Vietnamese early in the war, and was there in our camp. He, of course, was a great guy. He lives here in the U.S. He's got 2 kids who graduate from our academies now. But he was so clever, and so they trusted him a little bit. They let him roam around and do work. They made him work, really, which was great, because in his work efforts, he picked up on information and intelligence and shared it back with the group. Now, I never saw him personally until after the war, but he did a fantastic job. But he was the only one that I'm aware of. And I've studied it quite a bit. I've read about 20 books written by POWs, and he's the only one that I've seen. We had 3 or 4 Laotians with us, and that was it.
Okay. Larger diplomatic scene question. Was there any consideration on the part of the White House on the potential effect of the raid on Nixon and Kissinger's ongoing diplomatic initiative regarding negotiation?
The only thing I would say is, from my studies, I think they were getting a little worn down by 1970, and the Paris peace talks have been going on for a long, long time. And it was clear that the North Vietnamese, the communists, were going to be just difficult. They did not feel the need to give in. They didn't feel they were in it for the long haul. And that was really the main hunk of their strategy. They never won a battle, okay? Their goal was to wear us out, and eventually we would get tired of it and go back home. And of course, that's why they spent so much time and effort into propaganda. And they, of course, celebrated all the anti-war campaigns back home, because that was our main strategy. They tortured us to make anti-war statements, okay? So that was our main strategy. And I think the US by that time had realized it was going to be a tough road to hoe, and there was no end in sight. And I think that's why they were able to take that risk with the Son Tay raid. Is, well, we don't know what's going to happen, how long this is going to last, so let's go ahead and give it a go.
Here's a question from Poland. According to reports from the Polish embassy in Hanoi, the raid on Son Tay shocked both the authorities and the wider population. Despite the effort of the authorities, the rumor that the Americans had landed and flown out of the suburbs of Hanoi unopposed quickly began to circulate in society, and it hit the morale of the population hard. I appreciate that comment from Jerema Sloviak. Thank you. This is a great conference where we get to hear these things. I sure appreciate that input. Okay, here's a question.
This was the most heavily defended airspace in the history of warfare, and to penetrate that and to get in and out like we did was just unprecedented. And once again, that was due to the smart people planning and the execution of the raid. And I could just imagine what that did to the morale of the North Vietnamese, knowing that we came in their backyard, landed just practically in their capital, spanked them real good, and left unabated.
You know, one of the things we heard on Hanoi Hannah, the propaganda we heard every day, she quoted somehow, you know, occasionally something would slip through and they wouldn't catch the nuance of what it really meant. But Barry Goldwater had said at that time that United States military could land troops in downtown Hanoi and there wasn't a thing they could do about it. We didn't know what that meant at the time, but a few months later, a few weeks later, maybe we found out about the Son Tay raid and we said, ah, that's what prompted Barry Goldwater to say that. But it obviously did get their attention, and no question about it. And, you know, that also probably helped us too.
We've got about 4 minutes left, and the last two questions are really related to the same topic, and it's a great topic for people of with a military analysis type of interest. There was an account or a myth, this is the way it's read, the question is asked, that during the operation, the raiders encountered a barrack barracks of tall Asian men. The raiders engaged them. According to the account, these were Asians or Chinese, and I'll offer Russians have also been talked about. And before you answer that, let me mention the second question that's asked. It's really along the same lines. One report I read said that the Greenleaf support group actually attacked a North Vietnamese army barracks and killed upwards of 100 North Vietnamese army soldiers. So I think we all in the panel, everybody knows what that's referring to. Maybe I could start by either Terry or Pat. Can you tell us, because what they're really referring to is the fact that Apple One landed at some mysterious compound that was not the Son Tay POW camp.
Right, it landed at what was known as a secondary school about 400 meters south of Son Tay. Now, in talking to the Greenleaf people, keep in mind, I didn't know about that until Shimmer's book came out. You know, we were kept real close, you know, not to talk about it, but obviously they were technicians of some sort. Jakovenko, who was from that region, said they were not speaking Russian. So I don't know. Udo Walther did pick up a belt from one of them that was Chinese made, but then again, China did furnish a lot of the military supplies for the Vietnamese. I don't think any nationality or culture was ever identified as that, but they were at the secondary school. As far as 100 being killed, I would say that's probably an exaggeration. There probably was a smaller number, but they did take care of any and all opposition they met.
I have a comment on that. I learned something as late as last November. There was a visit of Americans into Vietnam back in 1994, 1995. And one of the escorting individuals who escorted troops to Son Tay prison was identified as a retired Lieutenant Colonel Ko. He was a plant. He was a specialist in surface-to-air missiles. He was connected with one of the visiting Americans who was an expert in air defense, American air defense systems, missiles. As they walked out of the compound at Son Tay, they were allowed to take photographs and film the remnants of the prison. They stood on a highway, and this individual pointed out that that yellow building down there is the place where the Americans attacked visiting Chinese who were here for training in SAM missiles. Well, this was a revelation to me, so I wanted to check out who this retired Lieutenant Colonel Le Ko was. My source, Merle Pribano, quickly located him that this was Senior Colonel Le Ko, 92 years old, who is still alive. At least he was alive in January. And he was the commander in charge of training of foreign nations in SAM missiles. These were the individuals that would come and were housed at the facility called secondary schools because next door within walking distance, within 2 miles, was the missile training facility. So this is for the first time where the high-ranking official admitted the origin of the visitors, of the people who were attacked there. These were not combat troops. They only had light weapons, and unknown number of them were eliminated and injured. So I believe this account, and this individual definitely, since he was in charge of training, not at that time. At the time of the raid, he was only a lieutenant colonel, but then he posed in disguise as a guide to an American who was an expert in our missile defenses. So that's how the revelation came up, and I believe it. Also, another piece of evidence that shows that these were Chinese, because Udo Walter, who commanded Greenleaf, took off a belt from one of the killed individuals who was taller than a Vietnamese, and that was a Chinese officer belt buckle.
Thank you.
That belt buckle is in Ross Perot's museum in Dallas.
Oh, okay. You know, with these 5 decades that have passed, it's amazing that things still are coming to light, and that helps to answer a lot of the myths, and I appreciate that from the question. Just a quick, simple, two questions with a kind of simple answer. Colonel Gargus, would you say that what was the number of people killed at the secondary school? Because, you know, that number of 100 to 200, I think we're all agreeing that's too high.
The closest I could come from all of the information, all of the inputs I got, that there were between 50 or 60 individuals killed during the attack, during the Son Tay raid, and that number includes the number at the secondary school.
Okay, thank you. It's, you know, we want to be as accurate as possible. Another kind of quick question that came up is, what do they know of the presence of any Australian POWs? So Colonel Ellis, did you come across, or are you aware of Australian POWs?
No, we're not. There was one Australian civilian who was kind of a crazy guy that we ran into in our POW camp after the agreements were signed, and they brought him to the plantation where the third group of release, the ones that were going to be released March 14th, 1973. And this guy was, he was like an international playboy gangster, and he jumped out of an airplane, or, I mean, I don't remember all the stories, but he was the only Australian I was aware of in our camps, and he was a civilian.
Well, I want to thank everybody. Our time has run out, and this has been very helpful. We want to build relationships to the Vietnamese. We want to be as historically accurate as possible, and we want to be as honest of where our values are and how we appreciate the brave men that went on this raid. And all of that is understandable as we build relationships with the people and the government of Vietnam now, and the Vietnamese community, the Vietnamese American community. We just really appreciate this opportunity to share this with you.
Yeah, could I say one last thing, Cliff?
Yes,
Many
sir.
of our POWs have gone back. I've been back. Many of us have been back, and we've had a great relationship with the people there. We love the people that we were with. Some have even gone back and met their jailers and the people that were running the camp. Colonel Ben Purcell did, and a couple of others have. And some of my friends who are fighter pilots are friends now with the MiG pilots from North Vietnam.
Wow.
So it's a little bit like it was after the World War II with Germany and Japan, in that we have good relations with a lot of them. And of course, we all don't like communism. They don't either. Most of the people over there don't either. And they really like Americans. So I think every day we're winning this war.
And with that, we'll sign off. We thank everybody for tuning in, and we look forward to the next presentations. Have a good day.